For as long as humans have walked the earth, we have been looking up at the sky. We have mapped and named the visible stars, applying meaning and sometimes magic to them. We have studied the bodies of the sun and the moon. In the many millennia that humans have walked the earth, we have studied the sky, and we have come to develop some kind of understanding about it and its properties. In the modern age, we launch satellites into the sky, travel through the sky, and even fight wars in the sky. We have telescopes and cameras watching the sky, measuring distances, and observing the great oblivion. We have, or like to think we have, an understanding of the world and its many mysteries. We've developed systems, sciences, and philosophies to understand the sky and its vast backdrop beyond. But then I am reminded of the line from Hamlet. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than can be dreamt of in your philosophy. There are things in the sky that we cannot explain, anomalous events, unknown objects, and sometimes even encounters with strange sky-dwelling beings. Whether alluded to in art or outright recorded by contemporaries of the day, strange events that take place in the sky, anomalous occurrences, or the sighting of unknown flying objects have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. For as long as humans have walked the earth, we have been looking up at the sky, and we have been seeing things. These are 3 historical accounts of UFOs. This is the retelling. On a warm day in the year 73 BC, a young Roman soldier stood nervously in the ranks of his unit, and he waited for the signal he had been dreading for so long. The signal to attack. Standing in a field in northwestern Turkey, the soldier had marched far from home. A legionnaire under the command of the famed tactician and commander Lucullus, the soldier was only one small piece in a greater war machine that was the Roman Republic, the greatest army the world had ever known. But despite this, and despite the superior command of Lucullus and the unmatched force of his Roman legions, still the young soldier fought to control his nerves. He was hot and clammy. His legs shook, and no matter how many times he wiped them on his clothes, his palms were always wet with perspiration. His armor felt heavy, his helmet felt hot. His stomach, empty from the decision to skip breakfast, growled and cramped. Around the young man, the other legionnaires stood idle and waiting, or otherwise went through their own pre-battle rituals of fear and anxiety. Some stood and chatted easily with the man next to them. Some prayed or whispered words to unseen spirits, seeking blessings in the battle to come. A few of the other men, the untested, were noisily being sick, their nerves having gotten the best of them. There was good cause for the nerves and anxiety that day. It was an anxious morning. In only a few moments, there was going to be a battle. The order would be given, the horns and the pipes would sound, and the battle would begin. Opposing the Romans that day was Mithridates VI, king of Pontus. A longtime enemy of Rome, Mithridates was a semi-legendary king, famed for his skill, wisdom, and cunning. He was also a staunch enemy of Rome, opposing their influence, resisting their expansion, and warring with her client states. If there was one man that was going to halt Roman expansion into Asia Minor at this time, it was Mithridates. When the king of Bithynia died in 74 BC, he had requested that his kingdom be absorbed by the Roman Republic. Mithridates, however, opposed this and invaded Bithynia to secure it as his own. It was a bad time for Rome. The Republic was racked on all sides by strife, wars, and rebellion. Spartacus's revolt and the Third Servile War had destabilized the homeland, while off in the provinces new rebellions were popping up, spreading violence and chaos across the ordered roads of the Republic. Regardless of the troubles she faced, Rome was not going to let Mithridates invade Roman allies without consequence. It took several months, but eventually an army was formed, and command was given to the respected, proven aristocrat, Lucullus. Lucullus and his legions marched on Mithridates, pushing them deep into modern-day Turkey with the plan of besieging the rich and plentiful cities of that kingdom. Mithridates, however, was no fool. He was not going to sit idly by and wait for the Romans to besiege him in his own kingdom. So instead, he rallied together an enormous army of some 300,000 men, and he took the fight to the Romans, marching on a second Roman force in the west of Pontus and destroying them. Mithridates next went on a rapid advance, besieging Roman-controlled cities in the area and reclaiming them for Pontus. Lucullus, meanwhile, was deeper inside of Pontus, behind enemy lines. His soldiers, eager for loot and treasure, urged their commander to keep moving into the unprotected lands of the kingdom. The army of Lucullus wanted to press on. Loot and treasure were far more valuable to the average legionnaire than duty or glory. It wasn't unheard of for common soldiers to come home from a successful campaign laden with enough loot to change their and their families' lives forever. Gold, silver, precious stones, silks, fabrics, trinkets, treasures, weapons, and slaves all waited in the unprotected lands ahead. And Lucullus's legionnaires wanted to claim it. Unfortunately for them, their commander didn't share their motivations. Lucullus was not a common soldier. He was a multi-millionaire aristocrat. He had enough loot and treasure. Lucullus knew that he couldn't press deeper into Pontus so long as Mithridates and his massive army were behind them. His objective had not been to capture the undefended cities of Pontus. His objective was to defeat Mithridates. So, marching against the odds, Lucullus forced his legions westward to confront the mythically large army of Mithridates. The king of Pontus had been marching through the region, rapidly besieging and capturing cities controlled by the Romans, before he was eventually stalled by the particularly stubborn city of Cyzicus, in the northwest of the kingdom, on the modern-day Cappadocia Peninsula. There, Mithridates' forces were forced to dig in and invest themselves in a prolonged siege. Lucullus, meanwhile, was marching quick to relieve the siege. His plan was to march on Mithridates, who was distracted besieging the city of Cyzicus, and encircle his army on the Cappadocia Peninsula, cutting off their supply lines and letting the massive army starve itself out. It was a bold strategy, one that relied entirely on the Romans' ability to avoid open battle. Lucullus, for all his skill and respect, commanded roughly 30,000 men, while Mithridates' force was said to number as many as 300,000. If the strategy didn't work and the Romans were forced into a pitched battle, they would certainly be routed and destroyed. As I said, Mithridates was no fool. He knew his army could be cut off and that it would starve itself out. He knew that his strength was in using the size of his army, not having it used against him. Hoping to avoid having his army encircled by the Romans, Mithridates dispatched one of his generals to intercept Lucullus and defeat him in a pitched battle. The two armies met in northwestern Turkey, near present-day Iznik. On one side were the tired and fatigued Romans who had marched across a country to be there, and on the other side were the conquering, successful soldiers of Pontus, who had already crushed one Roman army and were eager to destroy another. It is here that we rejoin the nervous young legionnaire from the start of this video. As the war horns were blown and the whistles sounded, men called and commanders roared their orders. The two armies would have shifted and surged forward, the awkward, charged moments before a battle hanging between them. Weapons clattered and armor clanked. Dust rose as thousands of feet pounded the earth and drew closer to one another. Doing his best to fight his fear, the young Roman soldier gritted his teeth and tightened his grip on his weapon. Looking to the sky, he muttered one final prayer to the gods. And the gods answered. Suddenly, in the sky above the two armies, an enormous anomaly lit up the sky. Then, falling on fire, it tore through the atmosphere with a brilliant glow before vanishing as quickly as it appeared. There may have been a sound like the tearing of the world. There may have been a crash as whatever the object was fell apart in the atmosphere or smashed into the earth below. Whatever it was, the flaming object in the sky halted the armies in their steps. Both sides had witnessed the portent, the unmissable glow in the sky, the shape of the object that fell, and they were stunned. What the ancients thought this anomaly was, a falling space rock, an omen, or a portent from the gods, was either not recorded or has been lost to time. Whatever it was, the event was so stunning and so dramatic that both armies dispersed and no battle was fought that day. The surviving account of the event comes from Plutarch, who wrote about the episode in his Life of Lucullus. Plutarch records, "But presently, as they were on the point of joining battle, with no apparent change in weather, but all on a sudden, the sky burst asunder, and a huge, flame-like body was seen to fall between the two armies. In shape, it was most like a wine jar, and in color, like molten silver. Both sides were astonished at the sight and separated." What this celestial event was isn't entirely clear, although it's commonly thought to have been a meteor or a bolide. Plutarch describes the flame as shaped like a pithos, a container the ancient Greeks used to keep wine in, and this well could have been a bolide. But could it have been something else? A UFO? A portent from the gods? In the modern age, with public fascination in things like ancient aliens, much has been interpreted and derived from Plutarch's writings. And while it was likely nothing more than a natural celestial event that was witnessed that day, it is often cited as an example of so-called ancient aliens. Whatever the jar-shaped flame was, it was enough to separate the two armies. The Romans likely saw it as a positive omen, or at least it was later interpreted as one in the context of Lucullus's successful campaign against Mithridates. In the days and weeks after the celestial event was witnessed in the sky, Lucullus and his legions would march on Mithridates and encircle him and his army, just as planned. In the end, the strategy worked. The size of Mithridates' army was far too great, and with supply lines cut off, it soon starved itself out and dissolved. Rather than engage in one single battle where Mithridates' superior numbers would work against him, Lucullus cleaned up the army of Pontus, through smaller skirmishes and engagements with the weakened and hungry soldiers of Mithridates' army. In the following weeks, many thousands of Mithridates' overextended men were killed in skirmishes or died from starvation, to the point where Plutarch records as many as 300,000 enemies slain. Mithridates was finally bested and was left little choice but to try and break out and flee from the Kappadag Peninsula, and while he himself succeeded, most of his army did not. The Third Mithridatic War, as it would come to be known, was won by the Romans, and thus the celestial event that took place in the sky that day on the battlefield was interpreted as a good omen. It should be mentioned that Plutarch was writing nearly a century after the purported events were said to have taken place. The celestial event witnessed by Lucullus's legions probably took place in 73 BC, while Plutarch's record of the events date from around the mid-90s to 120 AD. And while the events that day may have been a natural celestial event, a meteor or a bolide, this next account sounds far less natural than whatever occurred that day in 73 BC. In the mid-740s, a strange event was recorded as having taken place over the skies of Ireland. Ships, like those that sailed on the sea, were spotted in the sky, some of them with visible crew on board. Multiple Irish annals record the phenomena, like the Annals of Ulster and Clonmacnoise, though their accounts are brief and offer few, if any, details on the event. All that they do record is that ships and their crew were seen in the air. What these ships did, where exactly they were spotted, where they went, are all questions left unanswered. Perhaps the monks of Clonmacnoise really did see flying ships in the skies above them, or perhaps it was a mistranslation or a reference lost to time. Skeptics to the story of the airships over Ireland suggest it could have been any number of things, from an invented story to an optical illusion or shapes in the clouds. Perhaps what the accounts record was nothing more than an optical illusion, like Fata Morgana, which is the name given to the mirage created when distant objects like ships appear distorted or floating on the horizon. This occurs when layers of warm and cold air bend light on the horizon. While the argument of Fata Morgana is a reasonable one, I find it hard to believe that what was recorded could have been something as minuscule as clouds. Remember, this event was recorded by more than one source, and if it was a Fata Morgana, why was it recorded in the Annals of Ulster and Clonmacnoise? Clonmacnoise was an early Christian monastery and a cultural hub that was located well away from the sea. The original accounts of the airships over Ireland have long since been lost to time, and the story as it comes down to us today is from a series of surviving copies that date from the 1680s. Some of these later accounts of the event created details or added elements, such as anchors being dropped from the ships and sailors swimming through the air as if it were water, though these are all accounts that come from centuries after the original event was recorded, and none of their invented details seem to have appeared in the original account. So what happened in Ireland in the 740s? Were there really flying ships manned with crews in the skies above Ireland? Or is the story as it survives today just invented nonsense, dreamed up by the inventive minds of the 8th century? Maybe the 8th century was just a booming time for UFOs. In the 770s AD, the Frankish king Charlemagne was waging wars across Western Europe, spreading Christianity, expanding his empire, and exuding his influence across all his conquered lands. Among those targeted by the unstoppable Charlemagne were the Saxons, pagan peoples that occupied parts of modern-day Germany. The pagan Saxons were hunted down and destroyed in battle after battle, their rebellions being put down, one after another. In 772, Charlemagne and his forces cut down the sacred pagan tree, the Urmansur, which had stood as a sort of pillar in the Germanic pagan faith, and its destruction would have been a devastating blow to the pagan Saxons. After that, Charlemagne's forces moved further into pagan lands, attacking and occupying the Saxon fortress of Sigiburg above the Ruhr River, where they then fortified the settlement and prepared for a counterattack. According to the Annales Regni Francorum, or the Royal Frankish Annals, when the Saxon forces returned to Sigiburg in a counterattack to retake the fortress, they were met with more than the defenses of Charlemagne's soldiers. As the Saxons fought to capture the walls of Sigiburg, there appeared in the sky above the fortress church 2 flaming objects shaped like shields. These flaming objects seemed to have made no sound nor caused any destruction to the settlement beneath them, but they did inspire a great deal of fear on the battlefield. The attacking Saxons, fearing the sudden appearance of the flaming shields, soon fled, and the fortress of Sigiburg remained under Frankish control. The Royal Frankish Annals describe the event as such. But the power of God, as is just, overcame their courage, and on a certain day, while they were preparing for battle against the Christians in the fortress, the glory of God appeared visibly over the church within the fortress. For there are many people who say, to this day, that they saw an apparition of 2 shields, glowing red in color, moving above the church, both within and outside the fortress. And when the pagans outside the fortress saw this sign, they became confused and in great fear began to flee to their camp. What happened next is something of a mystery. What these flaming shields did or where they went is not recorded. What is clear is that to the Christians, the event was seen as some sort of a miracle. As with Plutarch and the Romans, the event was recorded in a positive light, with the flaming shields being seen as a message from God to the Christian Franks. What were the objects seen over the church that day in the 8th century? If they weren't meteors or other natural celestial events, what were they, and what did they want? Questions that fascinate, but that will likely never be answered. There are many more examples in history of airships and unknown anomalies taking shapes in the skies above us. Examples in art, in stories, and in newspaper accounts as well. Maybe I'll cover more of these events in a future video.